or, exhausted from a hard week or whatever. This was more like a permanent condition that they suffered from. It was like their lives had been slowly squeezed out of them by some process that nobody had bothered to define or label, I guess. So they'd come home after work and they would turn on the TV, or they would go to the mall and buy more crap that they didn't need. And they would act as if this was actually healthy and wasn't going to contribute to more of their suffering. And I remember thinking, even back then, before I really had any language for any of this, that something about that whole arrangement felt fundamentally wrong. And the thing that I found even more difficult to deal with was the fact that if I made the mistake of saying any of this out loud and complaining about any of these observations that I was having, I was immediately met with the same response every time, which was pretty much, well, you know the one. Well, think about the kids in China or Africa. If you don't like America, you can leave. Which, yeah, sure, okay, I'm 12. I'll get right on that. Let me just finish my homework and then I'll arrange my own geopolitical relocation. And by the way, that argument in philosophical terms is known as a logical fallacy. It's called a relative privation, to be exact, which is, this is the idea that because somebody somewhere else has it worse than you, your observations about your own situation are automatically null and void. And it's a remarkably effective way to shut people up, though it is a deeply flawed way to do it. And, as a kid, it worked on me for a while because, well, I mean, underneath it, there was the whole guilt trip part of it, right? And as you well know, guilt is a very efficient mechanism for keeping people from asking those pesky, inconvenient questions that reveal a deeper truth. So I guess what I didn't understand then, and what took me years to actually be able to articulate, is that what I was noticing, it wasn't ingratitude or anything like that. It wasn't that I was some, spoiled, ungrateful, ingrate, who hated everything about my country and just wanted to leave as soon as possible forever. I think what I was experiencing was something more like I was getting an accurate read on a situation that most people around me they'd been trained to not see it, or they just chose to not see it. Because the system that we live in, and I want to be a little careful here because I'm not interested in supporting victim mentality. I don't think that framing gets anyone anywhere useful. The system that we live in is truly, it's demonstrably misaligned with what human beings actually need to feel okay. So, there's a significant body of research that gives that feeling a name, officially, I guess. And it's called evolutionary mismatch. And once you understand what that means, a lot of things start to make a different kind of sense. So the thing that I think most people intuitively sense, but they've never really had the framework to articulate, is that the human animal, and I mean that literally, not metaphorically, is still biologically a hunter-gatherer. And the brain that is running your life right now, with a nervous system that's producing all of that anxiety and that exhaustion, it was shaped by hundreds of thousands of years of a certain kind of existence that we don't have anymore. So we used to have small groups of people who knew each other and who were living in a much, I guess, deeper relationship with the land and in each other's survival. And they also lived with seasonal rhythms that gave existence a kind of structure that we have completely lost. That's what we were streamlined for. That's the environment that shaped every instinct and stress response that we have now. And it also shaped every need for belonging and connection that keeps you up at night, calibrated for that world. And then, in roughly the last 150 years or so, we built something that is so completely different from that environment that our own nervous system just barely recognizes it anymore. And we just kind of assumed that we would adapt to it. Well, we haven't adapted. And what we've done instead is to develop this civilization-wide set of symptoms that we keep treating as personal problems rather than the structural ones that they really are. There's a researcher at the University of Zurich named Colin Shaw who he put this pretty bluntly when he argued that chronic stress and widespread health concerns, these things are coming from a fundamental mismatch between our nature-shaped physiology and the highly industrialized and mechanized environments that most of us live in these days. And the most important part of this, and the part that I find the most interesting, is that he said that this mismatch, it's not going to correct itself through evolutionary processes because evolution is just too slow. And we are moving too fast. So now this means we are on our own. And I think the data that follows from this is pretty interesting because clinical depression is exceptionally rare among traditional hunter-gatherer communities. So, all right, take for example the Kaluli people of Papua New Guinea. There's only 1 in 2,000 individuals who meet the diagnostic criteria for depression. Now, on the other hand, in industrialized nations, modern industrialized nations, we're looking at a rate of around 400 people out of every 2,000. Or that's about 20% of the population. Though I would be willing to argue it's probably higher than that. That is not exactly a marginal difference. That seems to me like a very loud signal that it should be, impossible to ignore. And yet somehow that we've managed to do just that for the most part, because we live in an ongoing state of denial. So there's a botanist by the name of Robin Wall Kimmerer, who is a member of the Potawatomi Nation. And she has studied this relationship that exists between humans and the natural world. And I think she's done it in such a way that most Western scientists don't really have the language for. So Kimmerer describes something that she calls the grammar of animacy. And so that's the concept that indigenous languages encode a relationship with the natural world that treats it like it's alive, like it's kin. So basically what that means is, from their perspective, the natural world is something that you exist in relationship with, not something that you extract from. And so her argument essentially is that when you sever that relationship and when you reduce the natural world to just a resource, and you reduce yourself to nothing more than a consumer, something in the human animal goes wrong at a very deep level.